Okay. This is a continuation of the ARIN at NANOG public policy consultation. I'm John Curran, President and CEO, ARIN. We've gone through two policies so far, and we're on the third policy for the day. So we're going to consider draft policy 2013-7, merge IPv4, ISP, and end user requirements. So it originated in July of this year as ARIN Policy Proposal 190. The Shepherds are Scott Librand and Bill Sandiford. It was accepted as a draft policy in August, and it's contained in your proposal and discussion guide. Staff summary: the proposal attempts to reconcile differences in requirements for obtaining PA and PI IPv4 resources, provider assigned and provider independent IPv4 address resources. One similar proposal under discussion in the RIPE region, the PI unification IPv6 address space, similar but IPv6. This proposal removes the difference between PI and PA, suballocation and assignment. Draft policy 2013-7 is still a work in progress. This is a draft policy, not a recommended draft. It's been posted to the PPML and presented for community discussion. It will be worked towards the criteria of fair and impartial number resource administration, technically sound and supported by the community. The staff legal assessment will be performed upon request when the draft is fully developed. Recent discussion: a unified set of requirements is a big step in the right direction and should simplify things. That actually concludes the staff introduction for 2013-7, and I will now have the AC come up and present it. Scott Librand. And while I didn't speak slow, I'm going to ask you should.
If I start speaking too quickly, please raise your hand and I'll slow down. So thanks, Kevin. The rationale and the reason for doing this policy proposal is there's been some recent discussion around the differences between ISP and end user requirements in the policy manual and the implications that those have had. In some cases, that has resulted in organizations pushing to have themselves classified as an end user network rather than an LIR or vice versa. The document seems to be fairly complex. There are a lot of detailed requirements in both cases, and in many cases they overlap and in many cases they don't, and the reasons for the differences are not always entirely clear. There's also the possibility that given the requirements in the policy manual and the realities of IPv4 exhaustion, that some small networks may not be able to get addresses from their ISPs because the ISPs simply don't have any more, and yet they don't qualify for addresses from ARIN because of the minimum allocation sizes and such, unless they requalify as an LIR or some such. So the attempt here is to simplify a portion of the policy manual, make the requirements the same in as many cases as is feasible. There are still many details around reassignment tracking, SWIP and WHOIS, that are going to be different between what ISPs have to do and what end users have to do. But in the cases where we're talking about how much space do you qualify for a network of characteristic X, the idea is that you could do that without having to decide whether network X is an ISP or an end user network that happens to have customers. So the attempt here is to keep it small enough that we're not going to be changing the entire NRPM at once, but there's still quite a bit to be changed in order to make this happen. As we've discussed with previous proposals, this is a draft policy, not a recommended draft. We're not trying to send this to last call after the meeting. We're trying to get feedback from the community as to how this should be developed and get the text ready for possibly recommending it in future. But first, that means getting feedback from all of you guys on what we want to do in a conceptual manner as well. This slide, we may come back to, has a summary of what is currently in existing end user policy and existing ISP policy, and what this proposal suggests we do to make them compatible. So in the first example, whereas the minimum allocation would be a /20 for single homed and a /22 or 24 for multi-homed, the proposed policy would be /22 single homed or /24 multi-homed for both ISPs and end users. So in that particular case, there's a change for other reasons from both the ISP and end user policy. But in the case of the multi-homed, we took the one that we felt was more appropriate for everyone based on the realities going forward. So there are a number of things in the policy manual that you have to choose between if you're going to attempt to consolidate ISP and end user policy and make allocations and assignments have the same types of requirements. We'll probably get back to these details in a minute. So the AC needs feedback from the community. These are a few questions that I came up with. I'm sure you guys will answer a few questions that are not on this list. But at a high level, do you like the idea of consolidating the policy between ISPs and end users, allocations and assignments? Which of these requirements do you think we should keep? Are there any other distinctions besides the ones remaining with regard to reassignments, et cetera, that need to be maintained, keeping ISPs and end users distinct? If so, what and why? So with that, I'd like to open it up for discussion. There's a number of supporting materials here that I can reference, or that Paul can reference if we get to that point in the discussion. But I think it's, at this point, good to have a fairly open-ended discussion about whether this is a good idea and what direction we should be moving.
Microphones are open for discussion. Vice Chair Paul Anderson will moderate the discussion. I ask, even though I don't myself do this, I ask everyone to speak slowly because we do have this being transcribed, and that's happening on the other end of the remote link. So to be nice to people, it would be nice to speak slowly and clearly. Thank you.
Sorry, some quick caffeine there. Center mic, host.
Owen DeLone, Hurricane Electric. I do not support this policy in concept or in its current text.
Could you be a little clearer?
This is a really bad idea.
Okay.
We've spent a lot of time and effort developing policies that serve end users reasonably well. We've spent a lot of time tweaking those policies, and this would essentially undo almost all of that in favor of subjecting end users to criteria that really don't apply to end users for the most part, in favor of simplifying the policy text to make everybody look like an ISP. And while I realize we're having trouble dealing with the fact that the lines between true end users and ISPs have gotten blurry by all kinds of different hybrid organizations, the bottom line is doing this to the average end user that is truly an end user and only an end user would be very detrimental to the community.
Thank you for your feedback. Far microphone.
Thank you, Paul. Louis Lee, Equinix, Chair of the ASO Address Council. Would you mind flipping back to the slide listing the different, there we go, summary of changes. Perfect.
I aim to please.
And my initial gut reaction is that I do not support the policy for at least the reason that Owen mentioned, and I do not see enough reason to make this drastic change. Another item that would need to be considered is membership status. For end users, you're not automatically a member. If you get an allocation, then you are a member. So that's also going to need to be considered if we make a change like this.
No, and I appreciate that that would be the current state, but I would assume that if there was a change like this, then the board would probably have to reevaluate fee. Anytime a policy is made like this, you have to assume that fee schedules and membership schedules could be revisited by the board to accommodate. So
Right.
just always good to keep in mind, don't pass a policy thinking that's a specific outcome will come in to those specific items. Thank you, Louis. Send it back to center mic.
Dan Alexander, Comcast, ARIN AC, and the author of this policy. And some of the comments that have already been made this, if you read the policy, it doesn't attempt to eliminate the distinction between end users and LIRs. All it's actually talking about is eliminating the different requirements around network operators obtaining resources. Once they have them, the who is requirements, the reporting requirements, how utilization is evaluated, all remains in place.
Yep.
All we're talking about here is the requirements for network operators to obtain resources either via the free pool or from transfers. So I'm actually curious, some of the earlier comments about how this would be detrimental or undo the work for end users. If you look at that comparison chart right there, it doesn't actually take anything away from anybody. It actually makes it a lot easier. So I'd be really interested in some feedback on how this is specifically detrimental.
Scott, did you have any feedback on that, or those that want to give examples of detrimental feedback can approach a microphone? I'm going to go over there, and then I'll come back to you, sir. Are you?
Managed the Obama spread roll, but speaking for myself here. Deck chairs. This is not a simplification. You're actually making things more complex by creating a two-tier system where the V4 policies are merged and V6 is untouched. And I can't support any policy that contains V4 only anywhere.
So you're not supportive. Thank you. Back to the center microphone.
Hello, Drake Pallister, DuraServer Technologies, New Jersey. I'm with ARIN. I'm an ARIN resource holder, vis-a-vis a ARIN member. I just want to express concern. I don't want to criticize or critique any comments or works that have been presented, but I don't want to lose the distinction between, I would be concerned, I don't want to see us losing the distinction between an end user and an ISP. The ISP is in business and traditionally has been to provide internet service, which includes connectivity, routing, transport, and of course, IP numbers. Now, we don't, well, I don't want to see any end user be their own ISP. There also may be challenges, whereas if the ISP that an end user is using can't supply V6, how is that end user going to make use of that V6 allocation or assignment if they're an end user, if the ISP they're using can't transport it to them unless via tunneling? They'd perhaps look towards a different ISP who could provide the transport of that V6 mechanism to their business establishment. And they would find a different ISP who could or would provide that V6 capacity to them. And hence, in changing or finding the ISP who will provide it, they'll already have the provisions to supply that end user a reassignment of their own inventory. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you
I
very,
appreciate it.
thank you very much for your feedback, sir. It'll be very valuable to the AC. Farm microphone.
Hi, David Huberman from Microsoft Corporation. A couple things. I'd like to reiterate a point that was made earlier by Owen. ISPs and end users is a very difficult terminology. It's very difficult vocabulary in 2013 and beyond. So this is the first attempt we've seen to try and bring some sort of sense to NERPM about what it means to operate a network versus a 1995 definition of ISP. And I think it's very important we continue having these discussions. This policy proposal, which I strongly support, does not make anything more difficult for anyone. It does not take away anything that the policy community has worked on for the last 15 years, 16 years. It actually makes things easier from a mechanic standpoint of how do I request space. And what prompted me to walk up to the microphone was my friend Maji's comment about this is a V4 only, which is a very good observation. But what you need to think about, what you really need to consider, is that this sets the transfer process up for better success. One of the key roles that ARIN will take over the next 1, 2, and 5 years is as a clearinghouse of transfers. And transfer policy, the way it's written today, relies on Section 4 in the NRPM in order to transfer IPv4 addresses, which is a huge part of what ARIN is today and is going to be over the next 5 years. So it's really important that we get business rational policy that people can understand and work within, because today I would stipulate that NRPM is too complex. It's too granular. It needs to be made simpler. The guidelines need to be streamlined. Some of the barriers of the actual math, a /20, /22, those need to be lowered, which this policy does. And I would urge you to consider, when you're thinking about supporting this kind of a policy or not, is how does this affect the transfer market? That's all.
Thank you for your comment. Far microphone, let's see if that one's working. First time.
Barry Dykes with Via West. Was looking at the 80% rule in 3 months, yet 12 months before you can go for additional space. So let's say that as an ISP, you, at 3 months, you're only 60% utilized of that new block. And does that mean that you take it back? What does it mean? And then after that, does that mean there's still additional 12 months before you can ask for additional space? There's a lot of ambiguity there.
One of you pick. Scott?
Scott Librand, AC Shepherd. So generally the way this has worked, and John can clarify, is that the requests are evaluated based on both projections and, more importantly, on previous run rates. So if you are on track to use this much within a certain amount of time, then you would be allocated the addresses based on that run rate, or if run rate is not available, on good projections. If your run rate changes and you end up not needing the addresses in the time frame that you estimated, then that will not result in revocation necessarily, but it will result in the new run rate being evaluated for the next subsequent request after that.
Is this also to be applied to the open resale market now that's going on with IPv4?
So the way that the policy is currently written, in order to get a transfer on the transfer market, you must qualify for the addresses from ARIN. So with one exception, and if you bring up the little chart thing again, the 3-month thing at the bottom center for ISPs is for addresses directly from ARIN. That is 24 months for addresses on the transfer market. So that is the only distinction at the moment that I can recall between addresses that you get from ARIN versus addresses you get via transfer. Otherwise, you must meet all the same requirements.
So I'll tell you what the results of this will be to a business, which you should care about, because in the end, that's who pays you, is businesses. Basically, the business who runs out of IPv4 space first is no longer marketable to all of these companies out there that cannot afford to retool to get to V6. I hope I said V4. Did I say it backwards? Whoever runs out of V4 first is the first one whose business slows down to a crawl, based on the way this thing is written.
So I'm not understanding how you think that this makes things worse for acquiring space on the transfer market.
So let's put the two together. I choose not to use the transfer market. You go out to try to get space. And what I'm finding is that here, go ahead and take, I don't know, a 24, which could last you how long with the customers? Not very long at all. Are you asking customers to come directly to you? If you're asking for a 22, you're not lasting very long at all either as a service provider.
So if you qualify for space from ARIN and you need a /18 to meet your 6-month requirement, then they will approve you for a /18. If the /18 is available in the free pool, you'll get that. This doesn't change that portion of how things work. I don't understand the.
Yeah,
Okay, no, that clarity helped.
Yeah, the policy is only affecting since transfers or free pool require the justification. This is just talking about justification.
I think maybe the misunderstanding there is the first row is the minimum. There is no maximum defined in this policy or in current policy for the general free pool.
Thank you, that clarity helped.
And are you, sir, are you in favor or opposed to this policy, or would you like to noodle on it a little bit?
I'm noodling.
Thank you. Remote, if there's any by chance? None? Center mic.
None yet.
Center mic, please.
Mike Joseph, Google. I strongly oppose this policy. First off, as a matter of good policymaking, this falls far short. It's a complex omnibus proposal that purports to harmonize the LIR and end-user policy, but in doing so, introduces a number of changes to both. It chooses the worst of each policy, and we end up with something that is so incredibly hard for any of us to parse. We need a chart to explain what it does, and it ends up changing so many areas of the policy beyond simply merging those two. If we're contemplating this level of change, it needs to be much clearer, and it needs to be spread out amongst a number of policies and draft proposals, because we shouldn't, this is a wholesale rewrite of both LIR and end-user policy that dramatically changes both. Also, as a matter of good policy making, I oppose policies that would tweak only the V4 and not the V6 policy, and I know that was already articulated.
Oh, but good to stress again.
Secondly, this policy has the interesting side effect of eviscerating the needs basis for initial allocation because it uses forward-looking criteria only. It's not captured well here on this chart, but if you read the policy language, you'll find that holds true. And finally, I think more fundamentally, this policy strives to solve a problem that's much more easily tackled in other ways. This seems to be solving the problem of having difficulty identifying whether an organization should be an LIR or an Insight. And historically, ARIN has mostly deferred to the organization to self-identify when there was a gray area. In fact, RSD has been quite helpful in providing guidance when appropriate in that respect. And I don't actually see that as a big problem. I don't think we have that many organizations out there that easily qualify for both and are just making the wrong choice. I'm not even sure what the wrong choice is. So I think to try to introduce this level of dramatic change simply to merely to simplify how an organization chooses to classify and receive resources is just far too much, and it changes things too much too. So I strongly oppose this policy.
Thank you for your comment. We're going to close the mics very shortly, so if you're going to make a comment, please either remotely start typing as soon as you can or approach a microphone. Sir with the stylish hat, are you just lurking there, or are you...
No, I'm making sure I defer to the center mic since Kevin was up before I was.
No, but I'd like to encourage the other mics. So the chair recognizes the stylish hat. I think I'm friends with Facebook on that hat or something.
That's excellent.
Who are you, and what's your affiliation, and what's your comment, sir?
I will defer to Kevin since he did step up before I did, but he's letting me. So my name is Louis Lee, and I'm from Equinix, and I'm the chair of the ASO Address Council. Thank you to the author for clarifying that this attempts to only synchronize the criteria and not make any other changes such that membership doesn't actually have to be considered. I could be in favor for this policy proposal, but I'm afraid it looks like it's actually 8 policy proposals in one, and if you add V6, that's 2 more. So it's for a lot of people, I think it's looking like it's already too much to do in one, and then others want two more. So,
So opposed at this point.
yeah.
Thank you. Remote participation.
We have a remote comment from Kevin Otti. I concur with the assertion that V4 only policies are a bad idea, TM. Furthermore, any policies should strongly encourage the adoption of IPv6 rather than keeping IPv4 on life support.
Thank you for their comment. Now to center mic.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire, ARIN AC. I believe that the policy, and I'm going to be a little ambivalent, not pro or against at this time, because I believe this policy needs a lot of work before I could support it. But I believe this is missing the evil that lurks below. We do have one key differentiator between IPv4 and IPv6, which is we're not out of IPv6. We're at end of days with V4. And there are aspects of the current NERPM that fundamentally don't work in runout, and especially don't work for end users in runout. The slow start mechanism is a critical issue because it doesn't work in the transfer market when you're looking for a 24 or 22. So I believe that, yes, we do actually need to do work on V4 that is separate from V6, but what we're looking for is, this is not 2013 issues, this is 2014, 2015 issues, and we need to clear out the aspects of the NRPM that conflict with the reality, which is a transfer market versus a free pool.
And so you're opposed, or?
No, I believe this policy, if it dealt with cleaning out the non-free pool issues, I would support. I don't believe tweaking some numbers to synchronize is beneficial.
Okay then. Last call to approach a microphone, going once, twice, third time. Center mic. Microphones are closed, sorry, as well.
Jason Schiller, Google. I applaud the effort of trying to simplify the NRPM and trying to streamline things for a world where transfers happen. And I think there's a lot of work we need to do on that.
I feel a butt coming up.
I oppose this policy. I oppose this policy because it's doing a lot more than the chart on the screen suggests. I'm going to dwell on three things in particular, but there's many more than just these three. The first I want to talk about is a removal of slow start. Yikes. Slow start is very important. I don't think we should be removing it. In fact, I think we need to figure out how to make it work in a transfer market. So I think that's a movement in the wrong direction. Second thing I want to dwell on is moving to a 12-month supply as opposed to a quarter. A long time back, we had 12 months. There was a discussion to move it to a quarter. I opposed that. I felt that you shouldn't change the rules of the game so close to the finish line, and we should just do business as usual and run until we're out. But nevertheless, we changed it. Now we're talking about changing it back. I oppose changing it back because you shouldn't change the rules of the game so close to the finish line.
Even though it's what you originally wanted.
The principle is...
No, I understand. The principle is the change, I understand.
So I think that is a bad change. And the third thing I want to dwell on is right now all justification is based on your current utilization. What did you use in the last quarter? What did you use in the last year? And projecting what your next year's need is based on what you used last year. And if you need more than that, well, then you come back again. And that is completely gone. It seems to me a lot of the justification for address that we currently use would be eliminated with this proposal. And if the way I read it, it seems like you could base a request strictly on a future projection of need. As in, I'm thinking about starting an ISP at my house and like a /8, please. I don't think this is a move in the right direction. It also completely removes the section about how to judge utilization for web hosting, which I admit is kind of vague, but now it would be non-existent. So I think it takes away a lot of the good advice to ARIN staff on how to judge need and utilization. So these are things that I think really need to stay in the policy as we run out, as we approach run out, and even in the transfer market, because I think the needs basis that we've been using up until now is fair and should be continued. There's a bunch of other things, removes the non-guaranteed routability, removed references to 2050. There's a big long list, but I hit the major ones.
Thank you very much, Jason. The last comment, sir.
Dan Alexander, ARIN AC. There are two problems that were both in staff comments, the feedback presentations at prior meetings, and just conversations that have come up on the mailing list and so forth. As we go into this depletion, we're already seeing cases where people are gaming the definitions, saying, I'm not an end user, I'm an ISP, or I'm not an ISP, I'm an end user, in order to either save money on fees or to meet certain requirements to obtain resources via transfer from the free pool. So the split requirements is already showing signs of issues, which is one of the reasons why this attempted to do away with some of those, to prevent all of the confusion that staff has to deal with and potentially move to a cleaner model. There's also real-world cases where network operators, when ARIN's free pool runs out, are not going to be able to get addresses from ARIN. They're not going to be able to get addresses from their upstream ISP, and they're not going to meet the requirements for a transfer. So there's a large policy hole that currently exists as the policy manual is currently written, that's going to potentially leave a lot of people with no options, which is something this also attempted to address. The comments about that I was kind of struck because it's hard to thread the needle where you both get the comments that this is an omnibus proposal and there's too many changes, but at the same time it doesn't address V6, so it's incomplete. I don't know how you can satisfy both of those criticisms. This was trying to deal with a certain set of criteria without making it overly complex, including V6. So we'll have to keep working on the language.
I leveled those comments, so could I respond to that?
Yes, that's fine.
Sure. I think the way you deal with that is you implement, as Louis pointed out, 8 policies or 3 policies or 4 policies or however many policies that deal with V4 and V6 on a particular topic. So you tackle the minimum initial allocation and assignment size for V4 and V6, right? There's ways to do this in the standard incremental model that we typically use to make policy changes that don't involve a wholesale rewrite of the entire V4 and V6 sections of the NERPA.
Does the AC chair have any thoughts on exploding into about 12 different policies at one time, or?
We welcome the work of people's employed. I said we welcome the work that'll keep us employed at our current wage. 0.
Last quick comment, Dan.
Just to respond to that, having done this for a little while, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, because in doing so, then we quickly go down the argument of, well, I hesitate on accepting or passing this one without the other one, or we need 3 of the 12 approved in order for me to really feel good. So it's a difficult road no matter which direction we head.
Thank you, Dan. That brings us to the end of the discussion on this and all our policy proposals. And I'd just like to thank everyone. It's been some great, vibrant discussion. One last matter of business, but first I just ask if everyone in the room could just raise one hand. Everybody. I'm going to wait till everybody, I can see you. I got all day. I see a bunch of you reading your email. Come on, all of you, even the work. Just raise your hand for a second. Come on, let's just for 1 second. CEOs too. You're really just going to hold out on me. So I'd ask those with their hands up to keep them up if they feel should the AC continue work on ARIN 2013-7. Keep it up. Try new things. Up high. You got, sir, right there. You need to. No hanging chads, please. Didn't work for Florida. It's not going to work for us, unfortunately. Please keep them up, I ask you, until they're counted. Counters, are we good? We're good? Yes, that was good. Okay, you can put them down. Thank you. Gentleman in the back, you can put thank you. We're in the middle of a vote, but I can give an option if that would. We're not done voting yet. All those opposed to the AC continuing work on 2013-7, please raise your hand nice and high. We're good? Yes, no? Yes, you can put your hand up. We have a parliamentary inquiry here, so I will refer to our resident parliamentarian.
The show of support is not a vote. It is literally a show of support supplied to the AC. As such, there's no abstentions. Parties show support, and that's recorded. It goes to the AC as a non-binding matter. If you don't wish to raise your hand for yay or nay, then effectively you have abstained, so we don't call it separately.
Would you like your vote to be recorded yea or nay? I don't think we counted because it was half. You're going, sorry? Okay. That will be so noted. All right, then with that resolved, thank you, sir. On our final one, on the item 2013-7, merge IPv4 ISP and end user requirements. To continue work, those in favor 5, against 11, in the room and on remote 76. This feedback is being provided to the AC for their consideration, and before I get the hook, I just want to echo what I believe Mr. Sweeting said earlier. There are 3 elections ongoing right now. I would ask you to please go to the website, read these statements. I believe there's speeches later this week, and please vote. With that, thank you very much for your participation today, and I'll turn it over to John for, I guess, final remarks. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes our policy discussion, and we're actually done. I just want to point out 2 things. One is, later on this week is ARIN 32 taking place in Phoenix. For those of you who get done with NANOG and don't fly out, I hope to see you here Thursday and Friday. We're actually going to go through these discussions again, along with all the typical reports that we do, and all of this will go to the AC for their consideration. If I don't have a chance to see you at the end of the week, please remember that we're going to have ARIN 33. It's in Chicago, Illinois in April 2014, so keep that in mind. That's it. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.